Hey everyone! Today we're diving into the fascinating world of the Tokugawa Shogunate, also known as the Edo Shogunate. This was the military government that ruled Japan from 1603 to 1868, and it played a huge role in shaping the country's history. So, let's start at the beginning. The Tokugawa Shogunate was established by Tokugawa Ieyasu after he emerged victorious at the Battle of Sekigahara. This battle was a turning point that ended the chaotic Sengoku period, a time of civil wars and unrest. With his victory, Ieyasu became the shogun, and the Tokugawa clan began governing Japan from Edo Castle in what is now Tokyo. Alongside Ieyasu were the powerful daimyo lords of the samurai class, who helped keep the country in check. One of the first things the Tokugawa Shogunate did was to organize Japanese society under a strict class system. They also adopted isolationist policies, known as Sakoku, banning most foreigners to maintain political stability. Under this feudal system, each daimyo controlled a han, or feudal domain, although the country was still nominally organized into imperial provinces. During the Tokugawa period, Japan saw rapid economic growth and urbanization. This led to the rise of a vibrant merchant class and the flourishing of ukiyo culture, which gave us amazing art and entertainment that are still celebrated today. However, the shogunate's power started to decline during the Bakumatsu period around 1853. Supporters of the imperial court eventually overthrew the shogunate in the Meiji Restoration of 1868. The new Meiji government established the Empire of Japan, and even though Tokugawa loyalists continued to resist, they were eventually defeated in the Boshin War by June 1869. Now let's take a closer look at the history. After the Sengoku period, Oda Nobunaga had already begun to restore central authority during the Azuchi Momoyama period. But it was Tokugawa Ieyasu who solidified control after the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. He managed to retain the daimyos in their domains under his new shogunate. Daimyos who supported Ieyasu were rewarded, and some of his former vassals became daimyos strategically placed throughout Japan. To keep the daimyos in check, Ieyasu implemented the Zanken-Kotai policy, which required daimyos to house their wives and children in the capital as hostages. From 1615 to 1651, Japan experienced a long period of peace between the Siege of Osaka and the Kien Uprising. During this time, the shogunate focused on civil administration, and trade and industry flourished. The Jinroku period was especially prosperous, with the arts, including the early development of ukiyo-e, blossoming. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. By the time Tokugawa Ieyasu took over, poor harvests and falling tax revenues in the early 1720s led him to push for the Kyoho reforms. These reforms aimed to strengthen the bakufu's finances as Ieyasu saw the military aristocracy losing power to wealthy merchants and landowners. Society during the Tokugawa period was structured under a strict class hierarchy initially set by Toyotomi Hideyoshi. The daimyo were at the top, followed by the samurai, and below them were the farmers, artisans, and traders. In some smaller regions, the lines between daimyo and samurai blurred, with daimyo being trained as samurai and vice versa. Over time, this rigid social structure caused problems. Taxes on the peasantry were fixed, failing to account for inflation or changes in monetary value, which meant declining revenues for samurai landowners. This led to financial struggles for both the shogun and daimyos by the mid-18th century, while the merchant class grew wealthier. Peasant uprisings and samurai discontent became more common. Reforms like the Kansei Reform by Matsudaira Sadanobu aimed to address these issues by bolstering rice stockpiles, reducing urban spending, and encouraging peasants to return to rural areas. By 1800, Japan had 5 cities with over 100,000 residents, and 3 of these were among the world's 20 cities with over 300,000 inhabitants. Edo, now Tokyo, likely became the world's most populous city with over 1 million residents. As we move into the late Tokugawa Shogunate, from 1853 to 1867, things start to get really interesting. This period, known as the Bakumatsu, was when Japan began to transition from an isolated feudal society to a modern state. The big catalyst for change was the arrival of a U.S. Navy fleet under the command of Matthew Perry. This event forced Japan to open up to the outside world, ending its isolationist policy known as Sakoku. During this time, tensions were high. Many daimyos, particularly the Tazama daimyos who were less trusted by the shogunate, were growing increasingly resentful. Anti-Western sentiment was also on the rise. The major political factions were divided between the pro-imperialist Isshin Shishi, who were nationalist patriots, and the forces loyal to the shogunate. There were also other groups trying to take advantage of the chaos for their own gain. In 1868, an alliance of daimyos and the emperor successfully overthrew the shogunate, marking the official end of Tokugawa rule with the resignation of the 15th shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu. This led to the Meiji Restoration, a period of rapid modernization and imperial rule. Loyalists to the shogun didn't give up without a fight, though. They continued to resist during the Boshin War, but were ultimately defeated at the Battle of Toba-Fushimi. Now, let's talk about how the government was structured during the Tokugawa era. The Bakuan system was the feudal political framework, where Baku refers to the shogunate and Han to the domains ruled by daimyos. This system split power between the shogunate in Edo and the daimyos throughout Japan. While the shogun had overarching authority, including foreign relations and national security, each Han had a degree of autonomy in their internal administration. The Tokugawa clan itself held significant power, controlling vast lands and many of the country's gold and silver mines. They managed around 7 million koku of land, which was a measure of the rice production capacity, out of the country's total of 30 million koku. Daimyos were ranked based on the size of their domains, measured in koku. The minimum for a daimyo was 10,000 koku, but some controlled over 1 million. To maintain control, the shogunate implemented several key policies. For instance, the Sankin Kotai system required daimyos to spend every other year in Edo, leaving their families as hostages. This was a strategic move to prevent rebellions. Each Han operated with a degree of independence but owed loyalty to the shogun. They managed their laws and taxes unless major incompetence was shown. In return for this centralization, peace was maintained among the daimyos and hereditary succession was guaranteed, unlike the chaotic Sengoku period. Daimyos were classified into 3 main categories to ensure loyalty to the shogun. The Shinpan were relatives of the Tokugawa clan, the Fudai were hereditary vassals, and the Tazama were outsiders who joined after the Battle of Sekigahara. Interestingly, it was the Tazama, particularly from the powerful domains of Satsuma, Choshu, Tosa, and Saga, that eventually played a key role in overthrowing the shogunate. And now, let's dive into the complex relationship between the Tokugawa shoguns and the emperor. Even though the emperor held the official title, the real power was firmly in the hands of the Tokugawa shoguns. The shogunate had secured a formal grant of administration from the imperial court in Kyoto, effectively sidelining the emperor. While the emperor had the ceremonial role of appointing the shogun and received generous subsidies, he had little to no influence over state affairs. To cement this control, the shogunate issued the laws for the imperial and court officials, which dictated that the emperor should focus on scholarship and poetry rather than politics. The shogunate even appointed a representative, the Kyoto Shoshidai, to handle affairs with the emperor and the court. However, towards the end of the shogunate, things started to shift. With the marriage of Shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu to the sister of Emperor Komiya in 1862, the imperial court began to regain some political influence. The emperor was occasionally consulted on policies, and the shogun even made visits to Kyoto. This growing influence of the emperor culminated in the Meiji Restoration of 1868, when power was formally returned from the shogunate to the emperor, marking the end of the Tokugawa era. Now, let's talk about foreign trade during the Tokugawa shogunate. The shogunate monopolized foreign affairs and trade, reaping significant profits. While trade was heavily controlled, the Satsuma and Tsushima domains were allowed to engage in foreign trade, with rice being the primary trading product. Merchants, viewed as outsiders to Japan's social hierarchy, were often seen as greedy, yet they played a crucial role in the economy. Initially, Portugal was Japan's main trade partner, with ships arriving regularly, followed by the Dutch, English, and occasionally the Spanish. From 1603, Japan began participating more actively in international trade. Notably, in 1615, an embassy and trade mission led by Hasakura Tsunanaga traveled across the Pacific to New Spain, modern-day Mexico, on the Japanese-built galleon San Juan Bautista. Until 1635, the shogunate issued numerous permits for Red Seal ships to engage in Asian trade. However, after 1630, the seclusion laws, known as Sakoku, were introduced, severely limiting foreign interactions. Only ships from China, Korea, and the Netherlands were allowed to enter Japan. Another significant aspect of Tokugawa rule was their stance on Christianity. Christianity first made its way to Japan in the 16th century, and Oda Nobunaga, a key figure before the Tokugawa Shogunate, embraced it along with Western technology like muskets. He saw it as a tool to suppress Buddhist forces. Initially, Christianity was allowed to grow, but by the 1610s, Tokugawa Ieyasu began to see it as a threat to the stability of the shogunate. As a result, laws banning Christianity were implemented, and his successors reinforced these bans. This crackdown on Christianity was closely linked to the introduction of the seclusion laws in the 1630s. The shogunate's income primarily came from a tax on harvests in the Tokugawa clan's personal domains, accounting for about 40% of the yield. Daimyos, on the other hand, were not taxed but provided military service, public works, and labor. The shogunate also obtained loans from merchants, which were sometimes more like forced donations, and imposed special levies for infrastructure projects.